Hi everybody, welcome to the show. I have the wonderful Kieran Devlin with me today. We've known each other for quite a while, and Kieran's part of he runs the Proteus Astrology website, would it be? If I said it
Yeah,
right?
that's my website, yeah.
So I want to thank Kieran for coming on, and we thought today we'd just discuss about astrology, and I'm just going to throw a question at Kieran and say, Kieran, why is astrology so important in our everyday lives?
Oh, well, I hope I could do such a question justice. Where do you begin? So, the first thing is what is it and what is it not? The second thing is, I think you have to think about it in terms of its beauty as a symmetrical system, as something given of the universe, but also then all the purposes and the uses that it has. So it's quite difficult to separate all those things out, isn't it? So it gets a bad rap of being all kinds of things that it's not, and because there are so many different types of astrology. So I think the first thing probably is to say that it's astrologies, plural, not astrology, because there are so many different systems. The main schism, if you like, is between the Western tropical system and the sidereal system, and it's forever being confused. These two, they're very, very different. And it's been compared to like learning two different languages. You have words in German and words in French for the same thing, but they're not the same. But they refer to the same thing, and they have the same function, and they can achieve the same goal. And I don't know how deep you could go. I don't want to sort of try and explain the whole of astrology to you, but I think one thing that I think is important to understand from Western astrology is the fundamental placement of the four angles relates to the solstices and the equinoxes. And without those, you don't have this beautiful symmetrical system that is divided into 12 segments. The equator and the ecliptic. The ecliptic is the plane that apparently goes out from the Earth, assuming it is a globe. I think that's the way it works, because I've been looking at eclipses, and to understand eclipses, you have to understand this cycle of where is the moon in relation to the sun and the Earth. So fundamental is this four angles. That's the ascendant, the IC, the descendant, and the MC. So those are if you think of it as like the four corners, and that relates to all sorts of things in the esoteric tradition as well.
Can I just ask, is that cross that you're talking about, that happens on everyone's
Cross.
chart? So it's in each person's chart would have a different placing for that, the top, bottom, left, and right. Is that you know what I mean?
They're different house systems. So
House,
if you
right, yeah.
house systems, it doesn't necessarily matter. You have equal houses and you have whole houses, but the one I use is Placidus, which gives you a more individual interpretation because it's based on the time-space coordinates. So you need exactly the time and the location. So if you imagine it's gauging much more precisely where upon the Earth that person was born. And some people say it doesn't matter. You can use any different house system. Again, like comparing different languages, they're all different, but they lead to the same goal in a way, which is insight into the self. So that's one of the main things about astrology, is what an amazing mirror or tool of, and some people say it's a language of symbols that allows you to interpret your self-development. So you could argue, well, there's not a lot of purpose in that. Some people say that's a waste of time, or you've got, the duties of everyday life get in the way, don't they? Earning a living and all the rest of it, being in the materialistic universe. But to me, one of the great beauties of astrology is that it's a mirror to the soul, and it can really give you profound insight into who you might have been in previous lives, as well as who you are now and what the cycles represent. And how that's unfolding. So it's like a constant unfoldment of cycles, which just happens to begin at the point of your birth, and that's how they calculate it. So yeah, the ascendant is probably one of the most important points on the chart, because that's the point at which you arrived in the world. And so that, you know, it's represented as a like an, if you think of it like a globe, it's divided into 12 sections, and then the 4 angles show you the key points in turning points in life. The ascendant is, you know, who you are, who people perceive you to be, who they recognize you as a physical body. Your the IC is who you are internally, your ancestry, your internal self. The descendant is how you relate to others, what you are looking for in others as well. And the MC is your reputation. So that's at the top. And the other thing that it mirrors is the seasons. So you go spring, autumn, spring, summer, autumn, winter. So that's like going around the chart as well. And the trajectory of the sun every day from its rising point to its sunset point. So if you think of the sun rising on the ascendant and then setting on the descendant, so everything in the upper half of the chart is in the daytime, and everything in the lower half of the chart is in the nighttime. So to me, it's got, we're just scratching the surface. There's a whole philosophy behind it. There's you know, just to give you an example of all the different types of astrology. So there's the general astrology everybody assumes, which is about your horoscope, your zodiac sign, where is your sun? But your sun is only one element in the whole chart. You have the moon, you have the ascendant, you have all the other planets and the relationships between. So it's almost infinitely, it has infinite permutations to interpret what that means. But then you've got Astro-locational astrology, which tells you, it does the same thing. It produces a kind of vision of where the planets are at the time of your birth, but across the globe in a different way. It shows the trajectory of rising and falling planets, as well as the angles onto the geographical and topographical land. So it might give you an indication that this is the city that you are going to resonate with your Mars archetype more than in another city, for example, or, you know, you go to this country because Venus is enhanced in this country. And that's quite an interesting aspect of astrology. That's astrolocational. Then you've got horary, which is that really connects directly with the divinatory arts of you go to astrology to ask a question that you don't know, and the moment carries all the information you need to reveal. Even, and you know, I've done this myself. It is utterly amazing how a chart, when you ask a question at that moment, can tell you where something has gone missing, like a lost object, or it can give you the answer to questions. And the only way to understand it is, you know, by following all these very traditional rules. It operates in a very traditional manner. It's not like modern archetypal astrology. You have to use the more traditional planets, but it can unlock secrets. It can give you revelations. So you might be wondering, well, how is that possible? How does that work? So you have to go back to this principle of as above, so below. And the corollary of that is as within, so without. So don't forget that part, because we're now in a kind of quantum world where they talk about spooky action at a distance. So one molecule can communicate with another molecule at infinite distances instantaneously. So if that is true in modern physics, I don't see what the problem is about understanding the ancient art. I would call it an art, because I think that relates to the alchemy, alchemical side of it, where it's about symbolic transmutation of the internal archetypes. And it also dispels this myth that it's about rocks in space having an influence on what we are down here. Obviously, the moon appears to do that very dramatically. The sun, I mean, look at the effect the sun has. But as for planets like especially ones we can't see, like Uranus and Neptune and Pluto, it's very difficult to say what that influence is without resorting to other methods of studying cultural phenomena over a long period of time.
Because they have such long orbits, isn't it?
Sorry?
That's because they have such long orbits.
Yeah, but they're not visible to the naked eye. So beyond Saturn, you can't see any of these planets with the naked eye. You need a telescope, and telescopes didn't come into being until the 18th century. So you could argue that they used stars, and fixed stars is another aspect to astrology. But just to sort of finish off that basic characterization, the two major different types of astrology is Indian or Vedic uses the sidereal zodiac, and that is 23 degrees different to the modern one. So you can get very confusing if you don't check and you're listening for your horoscope and somebody happens to drop, oh, by the way, I'm doing sidereal. It's a completely different sign because it's 23 degrees behind the tropical. And that doesn't invalidate the tropical. What it does is just give you another way of looking at the same thing. It's like a different perspective. And it's more, I think the sidereal system of astrology is more to do with karma and fated events that affect the individual, whereas the tropical, which is based on the northern hemisphere and the cycle of the seasons and the solstices and equinoxes, which we are very connected to. And I think the more we get connected to those things, the more you become aligned to these natural cycles, and it gives you like higher forces, higher source energy somehow. And but a lot of people have this difficulty in understanding. So why, if you've got two completely different systems that seem to explain the same thing, but well, you know, that I don't know.
That's the magic of it all.
One of those things, you know, people who can speak 4 or 5 languages might be able to understand this better. No, there are nuances and differences, but is it the same thing that the words are pointing to? Probably, but then it's hard to say, isn't it? So, yeah, and then, you know, the other thing that I also am interested in are these asteroids, which are, could call them rocks in space, that they sort of, they have a mythological and archetypal component. And I have a few favorites. I mean, the standard ones are the goddess asteroids. So you've got Ceres,
yeah.
Pallas Athena, Vesta, and Juno. Those were the first few to be discovered, all in the 19th century. They hadn't been noticed before. So the theory is, once they're discovered and they come into human consciousness, they're there for the purpose of revealing what they are, what their story is, you know, in the lives of people, and that I'm quite fascinated by that. And but there's 12,000 or more asteroids now, and it's gone bananas. And there's so many asteroids that you just can't keep track of them. So the way to narrow it down is just to pick the ones that you resonate with. Say, for example, you've heard a mythological story, and the classic one that I adore is this Eros and Psyche, just as an example. So there was the mythological story, which has been around for centuries. But then in the 19th century, the asteroids were first. Psyche was discovered, I think, in 1862. And then Eros was discovered or named. Once it was named, it then becomes like a living reality in the consciousness somehow. And then you have to think, well, what's the message of this asteroid? So I've been tracking that quite a lot.
Well, name gives something power, doesn't it? Once you've named something,
yeah,
it's got that power that it can have, not just over you, but also the power it's giving out.
Yeah. Plus, it's not always this, you know, highfalutin sort of mythological. You know, I think some people might be put off by how serious all that sounds. You can get asteroids that are named with like common names, like Dick and Debbie.
Hey!
But the beauty is, this is the beauty of it. So if you discover, and you'd have to do a lot of research, you have to go to a different ephemeris to figure out where the asteroids are. But if those link to any key planets in your chart, you then think, well, that's a bit weird, isn't it? How could that possibly be? Is the universe, has the universe got these hidden threads and connections that we can't see? And it can be true that somebody, with the name Dick can have the asteroid close to the sun in the chart, or at some point to show that there's a kind of personal linking up with the universe out there. So there's all this really. I think once you get into astrology, you kind of never stop, because it's a never-ending, remarkable field of study. And I think I've only just started. I studied for 3 years at the London School of Astrology, but really that's just a starting point. You can use it also for, you might be interested in this, for what they call theurgy, which is a magical application. And in a way, that just makes total sense to me, because if you read anything about the history of magic, you don't try to invoke Mercury, sort of the Egyptian version, on a day that isn't Mercury's day, or on an hour that isn't dedicated to Mercury. You see what I mean? It seems logical. Yes. It's like a system of hidden correspondences, and they, even Buddhists right across Thailand and Asia do this when they're making their talismans. And even when they're doing tattoos, you see all these amazing tattoos that people have. I once met a guy who spent 6 months trying to apply to one of the monks in order to get the kind of tattoo that he wanted, which was a representation of his, it's like what you call those thankas, they're like Tibetan style, the representation of his soul. It was an amazing tiger diagram all across his back. But he had to sit with the monk for 6 months, doing all the same practices and proving his worth in order for the monk to do that tattoo on his back. And then it was all done by astrological timing, so that it would have this kind of sacred, momentous connection to the moment. So I think that is amazing. That's another thing. Then people do financial astrology. They're always looking to, for secrets of making money.
They say, what is it? Millionaires don't use astrology. Billionaires use astrology.
Yes. Yeah, and they're definitely working the astrology right now. So the other thing is, in tumultuous times, people turn to astrology more. And I think that is definitely true. I think in the Depression of 1930s, a lot of people turned to astrology. In the past few years, I've definitely noticed a massive increase in people interested in astrology. I don't know whether they study it to any depth, because it can take a lifetime just to study in the basics of astrology, because it's kind of complex, and it can get very technical very easily. I think the way I came into it was because of my art history background. I already knew a lot of the paintings and the gods and the myths, and that was all kind of already there in my psyche. So I didn't have trouble with the symbolism, the symbolic side of it, what the planetary gods and archetypes mean. And that's always fascinated me. So I didn't have a problem with that, but sometimes the technical side of it can get very tricky. You have to really concentrate. Plus the availability of all these new programs, computer programs that can make, infinite computations, in a second. Just push it up a button, you can create different charts, you can do a lot more research. And then, so I think, a lot of people are looking for something else to explain the enigma of the world, because let's face it, a lot of stuff doesn't add up.
It's mysterious.
It's mystery. Yeah. I mean,
and also, I think a lot of people are looking for answers, aren't they? And especially, as you're saying, in the last few years, a lot of people are thinking, well, what is all this about? What is life about? It was kind of, I wouldn't say necessarily a wake-up call, but it made a lot of people think about, who are they? And I've been trying to encourage people to look at their astrological chart to help them understand themselves. And I suppose I didn't explain properly to people. They don't need to go and study astrology themselves. They can come to people like yourself, an astrologer, who can help them with their chart.
It does help to study a little bit, but that can also quickly become confusing.
Yes, because I did Vedic astrology myself many years ago, and I, like what you were saying earlier, I can see there's both, even though they're giving different not results, but they do still work. Both versions come true, ring true. It's
I think it also depends on how left-brained or right-brained you are. In a left brain, you could be stuck in a mode where it has to be just one thing because that's the way you feel safe. But in a multidimensional reality, multiple interpretations of the same thing could equally be true, even though they appear to be contradictory on the surface.
Right.
So the more you can get into that mindset, the more flexible and supple and adaptable your mind can be. Thinking, well, and they do say that the definition of intelligence is to be able to hold two contradictory concepts in your mind at the same time without freaking out. Because a lot of people freak out. They think if one thing has to be true, then the other thing must be false.
Yeah, life's not black and white.
Not necessarily. All things could be true, which is mind-blowing when you think about it, because you have to think, well, where's the logic? Some things have to be false. So within each territory, within each domain, it's true. That doesn't excuse or condone things that appear to be wrong in one other approach, but it's just, it opens up your mind to massive spaciousness and freedom of mind. That you say, well, there are hundreds of possibilities here. We don't have to decide now. And it's quite humble to admit that you don't know the answer fully, but you're willing to explore the possibilities. I think that's very important for me.
Well, one thing for people, if they had their birth chart, and I know not everyone knows their time of birth or they normally know their place, but it does help you understand who you are or why you were like you were as you was growing up. If you get your birth chart when you're an adult, maybe you never had one as a younger person. But again, it helps you see how you've changed over the time, because the whole point of our hopeful development in this life is to develop ourselves into better learned beings. Surely the chart can help us with that. It shows us our faults and maybe why we're a little bit like this or too much like that. I'm not explaining very well. Maybe you want to take over.
One very good analogy to understand that is to see the chart as a set of musical notations. A lot of people, even musicians themselves, don't know how to read music. Some of them. But let's say you can see a sheet of music and it's got all these notations. They obviously have a significance, but then can you play the music? And that, if you've ever tried a recorder and you're trying to read a sheet of music, it comes out very like a basic tone. But after a lot of practice, after a few years, you can play beautifully and bring a quality of grace or something to that someone else doesn't have. And so I think it's an interactive thing. You can't just think of a chart as a flat statement of fate. It's and this is where we get into these heavy questions about, so what is fate? What is can we see the future? Can we see around the corner? If you study the cycles, it heightens your intuition. So I'm not saying it definitely allows you to see around corners. It could, very often does, but that doesn't necessarily help you, because sometimes you do have to face things that are difficult, and maybe they are designed for you to be difficult because that's the best way you learn that lesson. But it's like playing music. So, and astrology, I want to say as well, is that astrologers, bless them, they are multiple different people with multiple different backgrounds and educational abilities and different religions and different upbringing. So they bring their own set of biases, and that must include me as well, because you can't help who you are. You are who you are. You see the world through a set of lenses, and that could condition you only to see certain things in a certain way, or it could allow you to see confirmation bias in the information that a chart shows. But if you're humble and you really study what is there and you get out of the way, almost like in Horary, you do have to get out of the way in order to get the correct answer to the question. And it doesn't always come easily. I think if you do that, then astrology has this amazing ability to just keep on giving you insights that you think, well, where did that come from? You know, it's the understanding of the symbols, it's the understanding of the degrees, and there's the technical side of it also gives you information about the planetary energy. The scientific side of it also can give you information, even though you think, well, that's not related, that's not even astrology. You know, there was a big split between astronomy and astrology, whereas if you studied the trivium and the quadrivium, which was the medieval system of education, which probably it would be a good thing to go back to that, because it's like basics. You have to study rhetoric and grammar and logic, or you study music, geometry, and astrology. That was the quadrivium. So we've lost a lot of that connection, I think, because things are so atomized in modern education. So you can draw from all kinds of different subjects and fields. And I think one of the things that I noticed with astrologers is that they know a lot, but there's a limit to what they know. So their interpretation is only as good as their knowledge of the other subject so one of the things I've gotten into is astrobiography. And when you read ordinary biographies, and I look at an astrobiography, I keep thinking, well, they should have used astrology to give them the insight, because in the genre of biography, it's like it's the humanities, isn't it? But this fascinates me because it leads me to this point, was this other main use of astrology is in like forensics. So it's like, if you have a question about somebody as to whether they were really psychopathic or not, just as an example, I'm not saying a lot of people were. And again, it depends how you play it. The same set of aspects could appear in one person's chart, and they would never become a bad person. You know, if you study the charts of serial killers, for example, you know, you very often see a kind of cluster of Pluto, Mars, opposite Saturn, and you think, oh, this person also had a tough upbringing. They were born with this gnarly aspect in their lives. But then another person might have a similar set of aspects, but not develop into not do any bad behaviors. It might manifest in a different way. They might master a craft or something like that, or you know, just work really hard on themselves to overcome that, whatever that thing was. But I think so. This is the other aspect to astrology that's not often talked about, which is that it gives you these very precise insights. That's why whenever I hear, like we talked about Florence Farr earlier, so I immediately went to her chart. I'm thinking, well, this is the way to understand who she was. And it does give you an amazing insight. So, for example, Florence Farr, who was an actress, a poet, a writer, a muse, and I'd done a study on asteroid muses. So I was curious. I thought, let's see what muses she has connected to her sun. Well, she's got polyhymnia. Polyhymnia is the muse of sacred music. And what did Florence Farr do? She used a psaltery, that strange kind of sacred instrument that the Greeks used in order to, they said she had a golden voice. Mm-hmm. So this, you see what I mean? This like connects the symbolism, the mythology, to her personality. Well, when you read an ordinary biography, you don't get this kind of analysis. You have to be an astrologer to understand this. And the other thing I've discovered that it can do is if you're looking at, you're interested in Gurdjieff and people like that. So I was fascinated by Krishnamurti and these moments of revelation that they have, that they're recorded in their diaries. So I think it was 1925 or something, under the pepper tree in California. So you can look at the astrology of that moment. And what did I find but a beautiful mystical rectangle in the
Oh,
chart
wow.
that day.
I was hoping that maybe we could do, because I loved your show on Krishnamurti and Bruce Lee, actually, but we should do shows on that if that was
Just
okay
on
to do.
him. Yeah, he's
Yeah, time's going
fascinating.
to run out soon, but I would love to do that and other characters like that,
Yeah.
because I think that'd be interesting for
Yes.
definitely my subscribers and viewers like
Mm.
them kind of people. And we're both going to a conference on Florence Farr soon, so
Florence Farr, that's why I brought it
we're
up.
going to do a show on her. She's just such a
Yeah,
beautiful
I think
woman.
so. Yeah, it might be worth it because it's coming to our attention for a reason right now. I have to look also at the North Node because why somebody comes perennially back into the attention at a certain time could be related to the continuation of the chart. The chart doesn't end. So when somebody dies, their North Node keeps returning to the same point. So that's when they come into prominence again. So I'll have to check that.
Oh, that's interesting. So that would be different for different, because people do come back round again, don't they?
Yeah, they come back into the news. So
Yeah, like,
usually you can find a chart that shows that they're having I don't know, a Chiron return or a North Nodal return. There's always astrology is like that. It gives you evidence that there's patterning, like a hidden, subtle patterning that we can't see that the astrology knows about, or it's like the cycles already have planned out somehow.
well, that could be the same also, because it's not just about people, but about epochs and
Yeah.
eras, or cities come
So
round and then they die off and
just
then
to
they
give you
come back again.
another example, I don't know if you've heard of this guy. What's he called? Alan Robert Krakauer, who produced or created the human design movement. Right? So I think he
I
may
know the
have done.
human design movement, but I don't know much about it. So
Well, I don't either, but I think you could say it's like New Age. It's too New Age. It's tried to put together Kabbalah, astrology, chakras, the chakra system, and there's another layer, I think, which is the I Ching, 64 hexagrams, and this is kind of merged into a technical looking diagram that's supposed to give you your 5 personality types. But someone asked me, a friend of mine said, so he had this revelation, he had this similar to Krishnamurti, a download of like a connection between his lower self and his higher self. And all this was revealed to him on a certain day. So I, being the kind of skeptical, I mean, I was prepared to understand that maybe this did happen because I saw that it happened on the day for Krishnamurti. So I checked the day that I think he called himself Ra Guru Hu from that day. Yeah, and he was in Ibiza in 1987, and he had a download. And again, the amazing thing is I checked the chart for that day, and it does show almost like a mystical, they call it a Star of David even. There's like two interconnecting trines.
So that's the up and the down, up coming down and the down going up.
Yeah, like a Merkaba. A Merkaba would be the 3D version of the two interconnecting trines. So you have to think, these are rare aspects that connect together. So, and they only come at certain moments. So I then thought, well, yeah, I believe something happened to him that day because the astrology backs it up. So this is like a whole other strand of astrology where you can verify or get extra nuance and detail that like a technical backup, like proving a point. So it convinces me that I don't know exactly what happened to him, but I know something happened to him of a spiritual nature on
At
that
the
day.
right time, in the right place.
that is, as long as you know the day and the location, you can go to the chart and figure it out. So I think that's fascinating.
Yeah,
Yes.
it is. We're going to run out of time in a minute, so I just wanted to ask
All
you,
right.
Kieran, if people wanted to get in touch with you, perhaps you could tell us about your website or what you offer. We've only got
Yeah,
a
it's
couple of
called
minutes left.
Proteus, and the reason it's called Proteus is because that figure is he's a seal herder in one of Neptune's many assistants. But he was the teller of truth and prophecy. But the trickiness of it was it's like a divinatory tool. You had to catch him, but he was a shapeshifter. So when you caught him, he changed, and you had to catch him before he could change. Then he would tell you the truth, which was a prophecy. So I just was fascinated by Proteus. So it's called proteusastrology.co.uk. So it's all one word. And I think I post a lot of, I do video. I've got a YouTube channel as well, the same title as Proteus Astrology. So I'm keeping to that because I find that resonates for me, that link to Proteus.
I've put you on my community channel a few times, so hopefully people have been
Oh
finding
yeah,
you anyway.
I wrote that article for your magazine, Hermes
Yep,
Risen.
Hermes Risen. So Kieran always also writes for Hermes Risen, and hopefully he'll be putting some more articles in soon. But I wanted to
Yeah,
thank you, and I hope that we'll do more shows on specific people. I would really like to
yeah,
do that.
yeah. Well, let's do Florence Farr
Okay, yes.
because I'm interested now. Plus, we'll see. We can comment on the theatre productions that are going ahead. I think it's not until July, though, is it?
No, that's it. But we can, it'd be great to discuss various people. But I'm going to say thank you because this will run out in a moment. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Check out Kieran's website and thank you, everybody. And
Thanks,
you,
Debbie.
Kieran.
Thank you. Yeah.